I don't know if anybody out there will care about this, but this is just me randomly rambling about things that are on my mind. Not really doing anything except enjoying a good buzz from my gummies and sipping on some pop. You know, I thought I was going to have a little more to say than what's coming up, but all of a sudden, as soon as I start recording, my thoughts just disappear. Even though I had stuff on my mind before I started recording. It really is a nice spring day outside right now. I think it's around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which in Celsius is somewhere in the upper teens, I think. I used to have this chart that told me what the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit was, but I can't remember if I even still have it. I do know, I do remember that 50 degrees Fahrenheit is 10 degrees Celsius. And that's kind of interesting. And what's also interesting is that Fahrenheit and Celsius actually cross over with each other at negative 40 degrees. So they do cross paths with each other. That actually is a pretty interesting fact. One that probably most people either aren't aware of or don't care about, but to me it's interesting. No, I also have like specific historical figures from ancient history that I also find very interesting. People that, in the grand scheme of things, are not as well known as people like Julius Caesar, for instance. But to me, I found them interesting, even if their stories ended tragically sometimes. Like, for instance, in the early days of the Roman Republic, there were multiple times where they almost got wiped out. You know, there was almost a time where there would never have been a Roman Empire. It was just that close, a couple of times, or a handful of times. But somehow that Roman Empire still grew up out of the kneecap of Italy like it was nothing. I mean, it wasn't nothing, but when you look at how far across the map they spread, it sure seemed like they did it like it was nothing. But in their early days, they ran into Celtic tribes from the north that sacked the town of Rome once, early in its history. Maybe it was a small city at that point, I don't know. I don't remember. And then, of course, you also had Pyrrhus of Epirus from Greece. That guy won a few battles against the Romans early on. But then he got sidetracked, did some other stupid stuff, and then when he went up against the Romans again, he had no allies to back him up, so he lost finally. So he ended up losing the war anyways. I always found the story of Pyrrhus interesting. And then you had, even later on after that, you had Hannibal Barca. I think I'm saying his name right. I know it's Hannibal. And he came from Carthage. And he actually stood a chance of destroying the Roman Republic, but I don't remember exactly why he wasn't able to, but I know that he took a very risky journey through what is now France, I think, at some point, to try to come down into Italy from the north. And I do remember he lost a lot of troops in that journey. And I think for some reason he didn't have proper siege equipment to properly besiege the city of Rome itself. And I think that's why he ultimately failed. My memory could be off. I'm just going based on what I remember. But I found the stories of these people interesting. I mean, could you imagine what would have happened if we would have had, instead of a Roman Empire, a Pyrrhic Empire? Or imagine if it had just been Carthage. Carthage is just spread across all that territory. Could you imagine how different history might have been if that happened? Like, that's interesting stuff to think about. It truly is. But somehow, through everything, we still ended up with a Roman Empire. We still ended up with a Julius Caesar. We still ended up with all of that. And that's all because those guys that came close to destroying the Romans in the early days, for whatever reason, were just not able to do it. And I guess I'm out of stuff to say for right now. If other things come to me, I may start a new recording. So for now, I'm just going to end this here. Since I've been talking about the Romans so much lately, earlier on in this video, I was just thinking about another historical figure that I thought was very interesting. Spartacus. He was the leader of a rebel slave army that rose up against the state. Now, I don't remember exactly what happened to Spartacus in the end, but I know that the majority of his forces ended up crucified. But these people knew what the risks were when they rose up against the Romans, and they did it anyways. They didn't really know if they were ever going to win. They probably knew they didn't stand a chance, but they went down swinging if they could. And as we all know, the Romans were very corrupt. But all of these historical people that I find interesting, that at least stood up to the Romans in some way where maybe they had a chance of actually preventing the Romans from having ever becoming an empire. Like the early guys that went up against them. Coming from Greece and Carthage, those guys. But I guess when you live under a corrupt empire, we'll say, and you know about it, I guess for a proper rebellion to take place, you have to be prepared for the possibility of being crucified by the state. Because I can honestly say that I live in the U.S. and I can't stand any politicians, Democrat or Republican. I can't stand any of them. And, you know, how do you vote when you don't even have any good options anyway? So I just don't do it. I mean, it could be fun just one time to, you know, actually vote on a coin toss and just see what I get. Just once, I should try to do that. When it comes to there being an election, and it's down to only two choices, heads or tails, whichever one I get, that's the one I vote for. Even if I don't like either one of them. Just once it could be fun to do that. Just for the hell of it. Don't know if I'm going to, but it could be interesting to do that. Could be funny. Hang on. Okay, I think I'm okay now. I had to blow my nose and all that nonsense. You know how it goes. Stupid things the human body makes us do while we're prisoned inside of it. Because that's genuinely how I view the human body. I view it as a prison cell for my consciousness. And it's got nothing to do with the way I look on the outside. That's got nothing to do with it. No, it's the inner workings of it that I hate. Especially the kind of issues it causes me to have that most other people don't seem to have or understand. It's rare problems that need to be fixed with surgery, that kind of stuff. And it's like, why bother? Why take care of the prison cell when I should just stage a jailbreak at some point? Do I have a plan to do anything like that? No. But for now, I'm at least enjoying the good hobbies that, still help to distract somewhat from how messed up this reality is. So as long as I'm enjoying my distractions and my addictions in a healthy way, I try not to overdo it with the alcohol, and I've cut back quite a bit, I think. I got just the right amount to where, I've got that nice little buzz, and that's all I really need. Just enough to relax me. Of course, right now I'm not having alcohol. I just had some gummies instead, but I've pretty much just been trying different beers lately. Just seeing which ones I like. And I think I found one that I do like, a good one. It's one that I've seen before many, many, many times, but just never occurred to me to ever buy it until I decided to try it one day. It's called Voodoo Ranger. I really do like it. I mainly just drink it for the buzz. Flavor, the flavor of the regular one is decent. My problem with the Voodoo Rangers is that the fruitier flavors just taste like the regular one. But with a tiny, tiny hint of fruitiness if you imagine it hard enough. But the buzz that I get from them, ooh, is it nice. Even the weaker ones. No, I'm not being paid, I'm not a paid shill. It's just that I like it. Well, this is a decent length for a random ramblings video, I think. I might end this here, maybe not. If I have more to say later on, I might come back to this. But that's all I have to say for now. I guess I have a little bit more to say, so I decided to come back with another recording. A lot of people think that I am the way that I am merely because somebody hurt me in the past, and that's why I feel the way I do about this reality. No. It's the misery that I've witnessed in others. I've had people tell me things that have happened to them, things that I can never forget. And that stuff weighs on me just as much as my own stuff does, if not more. Somebody saying, oh, you're just antinatalist because somebody hurt you. That's just ignorance talking right there. There have been times where I have tried to help. And sometimes I was able to help, sometimes I wasn't. But the times when I wasn't able to affected me very deeply sometimes. So, that's the truth of it right there. And then it isn't even just the people either. It's the animals, the way they get tortured in the factory farms and the slaughterhouses. That is something I will never be okay with. And while I understand that humans are just animals anyways, I'm talking about the ones that are not human. I think having empathy for them matters just as much as it does for other people. If not more, because They are unfortunate enough to have to be trapped in this world with us. That's how I see it. The animals aren't here for us. They're just unfortunate enough to be trapped here with us. That's why I'm vegan, so. That's just something about myself that will never change. Even though I admit there are times where I miss things that I used to eat in the past. Or I should say, individuals I used to eat in the past. It doesn't mean that I necessarily want to go back to that, because I can still empathize with the suffering, and I don't want to cause that kind of suffering, so I don't want to participate in it. I wouldn't want it done to me, so why would I do it to them? I guess that's a good way to look at it. Although I guess in my case, if I did ever run across a cannibal at some point, I might even be tempted to provide their seasonings for them. If I find myself in that kind of situation, I'm just probably going to laugh, I mean, sure, being killed by a cannibal could be horrible. It depends on how they do it. But I guess I wouldn't really care that much if they did actually eat what they wanted from me, I guess. Once I'm gone, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I know this got really dark, but I didn't even expect it to go this way. It's just how my mind wandered off. It's where it wandered off to, but all I can say for sure is, when it comes to the non-human animals, I am vegan for them, so. That is just my personal choice, and I'm going to stick with that. But yeah, that's why I am antinatalist. That is why I believe so strongly in the right to die. It is not just because of things that happened to me. It's because of things that I've witnessed, things I've had people tell me about that happened to them, things I've heard about, the cruelty that goes on in our world. A lot of it's unfixable, unless you can manage to destroy the entire thing. While I understand a lot of people don't like the idea of just destroying the entire Earth, it's simply a fact that if it could ever be done, well, what suffering would there be if the Earth didn't exist? I mean, sure, there might be other worlds like Earth out there somewhere. That's a possibility. I don't really know, honestly, but what I can say for sure is suffering on Earth would be gone if there was no Earth. Imagine if it was just a barren wasteland of rocks, sand, and dry ice. No, not a speck of life anywhere. If that's what the Earth was, I think that would be way better than what it is now. And no, I'm not depressed. I just see this reality for what it is. Most people just ignore the suffering going on around them, and as long as it's not happening to them, well, their life is okay. That's fine. Or they just have no empathy for them. To me, bringing a kid into the world is just not worth the risk because of the horrible, horrible, horrible things that could potentially happen to them. Things far worse than have ever happened to me could happen to my kid. If I had one. And that's why I am antinatalist. I cannot take the risk of bringing a kid into the world and then having them suffer far worse than anything I've been through. And to know that that's a possibility, I can't risk it. Ever. And people who take that risk on other people's behalf like that, well, I try not to let them disgust me, but I can't help it. Because at the end of the day, in the majority of cases, when it comes to a life being created, the people that are creating that life, they don't care in the moment about what kind of suffering their kid could experience in the future. They don't care about how they could die. They don't care about that in the moment. For me, that's the kind of stuff I think about all the time. I don't just think about stuff that could happen to me. I think about stuff that could happen to my kid if I had one. Things I could never, ever, ever protect them from could happen to them, and they could be very, very horrible. Like, for example, my kid could be killed by a drunk driver and burned to death in the car. That could happen. And if that happened, I would be equally as responsible as the drunk driver. For me to have brought a kid into the world and for that to end up happening to them, I would be equally as responsible as the drunk driver. That is the way I see it. And that is how I will always see it. And I've probably rambled on long enough at this point, so I'm probably just going to edit these and remove the sinus noises that I make sometimes from the audio and remove the times where I was blowing my nose, things like that. That's really all I ever cut out of my audio when I make these. Anyway, I do hope that in some way something I had to say was relatable to somebody. Oh, and one last thing. I noticed the gas prices lately. The gas prices alone seem to me like a valid of enough to exit. If somebody wants to do that. Yep. Well, at this point I rambled on long enough, so I'm going to end this here.